instead the 2024 Terms of Service, including the policy and privacy policy.
Oh, no.
By checking this box, you consent to the processing of your personal data in...
I thought you were doing a vocal exercise, but you're reading
Yes.
the EULA on archive of our own. Okay, no, that's okay. That's okay. Hello, everyone. I think we faded in, Kate. I think we...
Yeah, we snuck up on them again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kaki.
I'm Kay.
And welcome to The Joy of Trek. Do we have a title for these sort of
We do not.
off week? We do the recap episodes.
Yes, and those are the Patreon ones, where we break the time vortex, and Chief Engineer Greg can be live
we do
with
those
us.
for our lemon stealing whores. And so, what are these ones?
These
where
aren't. Oh, the fanfic readings. Oh, I don't know.
I mean, we can't do like priority one message because I think every Star Trek podcast does that
Right,
with their
yes.
emails.
Let's see. We could have something like, oh gosh, from the Arc. Is there something like? Is there some? Oh, what's the name again of that time portal that they did in the animated series?
Ooh, was that the Guardian of Forever, or was it something else?
Something like that. Yes. Maybe if we can figure out what that's called, and then
That's a great idea because we're looking at alternate possible worlds where we can.
that too. Yes. Alternate
I love
timelines.
that.
Yes, that sounds like a good thing to call it. To call our little readings. So yes, instead of a episode of The Joy of Trek as usual, we will have a reading from a fanfic that has been sent. We will try not to do the voices too. No, we won't. We do.
I was going to say, are you sure that's a promise that you want to make?
No. Well, I mean, it's harder to do a structurally consistent and proper voice rather than just doing something batshit. And
As someone who has recorded multiple audiobooks, I beg to differ. It's not hard at all. It totally is hard.
I was going to say, what are you on about?
But it sure can be fun. Hey, what are we reading this week?
Okay, this week's story is called "Oh Captain, My Captain" by VallesMarineris. The rating is teen and up. Audiences no modern category, male, Star Trek the original series, Star Trek the original series movies. Ah, okay.
Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah. They've got loads of tags. They've got fluff, humor, post Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. So, people who... Oh, also Season 3, Episode 22, The Savage Curtain.
Questionable amateur theater productions. Okay, I'm wondering what that means.
Oh, I'm real curious. But also Valentine's Day.
And it is part of the Candy Hearts Exchange collection.
Oh, that's adorable. This is from 2023. Oh, it came out on the 15th of February, 2023.
So that would have been the day after Valentine's Day.
Okay, I'm really excited. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, do you want to go first?
Well, hang on. Let's read the summary first.
Oh, yes.
Spock explores human romantic traditions and works on a surprise for Kirk. Meanwhile, Kirk gets back at him for overuse of a title they now share.
Oh, I'm curious about that. Oh, Spurk, the original /fiction.
Right, yes.
To this day. And it's for Smile_Edgeworth. Oh, I do like it when the sort of fanfic community shouts one another out.
Right, yes. All right, you take the top. Or take it from the top.
Okay,
whatever.
well, maybe we're making some assumptions about Kirk and Spock's relationship in this. I wish to discuss an aspect of our relationship, Captain.
Jim sat back in his desk chair in their apartment, torn between exasperation and amusement as he looked up at Spock. Even with the return of the majority of Spock's memories and the assurance that he had the emotions that corresponded to them, there were definitely a few things that were a bit off now. Not off exactly, because, God, how could anything about those warm eyes looking down at him be wrong, but strange, different.
And what would that be? Jim said, and maybe it was a spark of mischief, maybe just a desperately needed outlet for a mild, ongoing annoyance, but he couldn't help but add a pointed, Captain.
Spock, true to form, ignored the mild barb, raising an eyebrow before continuing as if there was nothing at all odd about Jim addressing him that way. After all, they were both captains now. Jim could almost hear him say that it was only logical.
Yeah, that's right, because after Star Trek 4, he got demoted. Kirk got demoted back from Admiral.
Oh, yes.
As a reward for saving the Earth. Let me see. Discussion with members of the bridge crew have led me to understand it is customary to engage in more elaborate courtship rituals at certain points during the year, and yet from what I recall, we rarely did so. Was there a reason for this?
Courtship rituals? Married, Spock. We're a bit beyond courtship.
They're married? That's adorable!
And a bit beyond awkwardly talking about their relationship with the desk between them. I'm sure the desk gets involved in other ways. With a groan that reminded him of just how young he wasn't, he got to his feet, circling the desk to rest a hand on Spock's arm. And that's fine.
I want to make that joke from Weeds, even though it's hugely inappropriate.
Which one?
Where they're discussing a certain aspect of, like, male anatomy.
Right.
Like, what do you call the bit between the balls and the asshole? Like, is it the taint? No, it's this. And then they ask somebody else, what do you call the thing between the ball sack and the asshole?
Yeah.
The desk.
It was the coffee table, actually.
In that case, yes, you're right. And that's fine. Okay. Is it? The tiniest frown pulled at Spock's lips, a sight that cheered Jim immeasurably. Aww. Oh, yes. Did you know, in North America, a frown is something you do with your mouth instead of your eyebrows?
I was really surprised to figure that out. Yes.
So now, like,
frown is, to me, it's like kind of like scrunching
furrowing your brow.
Yeah, exactly.
A furrowed brow. Like,
right, yes. And the frown is just a pouty.
It's just a pouty,
unsmiley face. Like,
hence, turn that frown upside down.
Right, yes. Makes more sense that way, I guess.
It does.
Yeah.
Spock would never be the most expressive person, and Jim would never want him to be anything but what he was, but the impassivity he'd shown after his resurrection was a painful reminder of their very early acquaintance, and it was good to see his old self from more recent years returning. Is this why they say romance is dead?
Eh? Spock, were you watching soaps with Bones again?
No. Spock raised an eyebrow at Jim as if he was the one being weird for questioning Spock's new hobby. There was a marathon of romantic films from across the centuries on the Hallmark Network. That is a really good one. On the Hallmark Network, Dr. McCoy believed I would find it educational.
More like he infected your brain, Jim said, lifting his hand to tap Spock's forehead. And he's taking advantage of having someone around who'll actually tolerate that stuff.
It would be more accurate to say that I infected his brain. Spock covered Jim's hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek, and, oh, what did it say about him that the gesture still made him melt after all these years? And I was under the impression you enjoyed romantic media.
I do. I just prefer stuff that's to a higher standard.
Ah.
The classics like T'Lan and T'Sel, or Sea and Star.
The former was quite controversial on Vulcan. Some called it almost pre-reform in its unbridled expression of emotion. I recall many of my classmates watching it in secret. Ooh! At Jim's inquiring look, he added, my parents felt comfortable with my ability to judge such media intake for myself. Hell yeah!
I mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean,
Sarek is a Vulcan who f***s.
True. I mean, there's living proof of that, so the forbidden appeals, even to Vulcan teenagers. Does it? Laughed softly, drawing closer to Spock to place a fond kiss on his lips. And honestly, I can see it. Oh, it's certainly restrained by human standards, but the way they look at each other, the slightest touch, you can practically feel the heat.
Whew.
A feeling he knew better now than when he first saw it. Much of the metaphorical language took on a different cast when you know exactly what sort of fires they were alluding to.
Ooh. Something shifted behind Spock's eyes, and Jim couldn't quite suppress a gasp as Spock wrapped an arm around his waist and pulled him close, his breath hot against Jim's face like the desert winds of his memory. You enjoy my heat, Captain. Oh.
Jim's tongue darted out to wet his lips, a motion Spock watched avidly. He couldn't possibly have meant that as suggestively as it sounded, right? But God, he was right. Jim did enjoy his heat in much more ways than one. He even enjoyed being called Captain, if Spock said it that way. But turnabout was fair play, and unfortunately, Jim still owed the Admiralty further reports to atone for his crimes.
Not in the summer, Captain. Jim untangled himself from Spock's grasp to return to his computer, wincing at the 3 messages that hadn't been there when he'd stood up. And, oh joy, one of them was from Admiral Peer, trying to get him to participate on her latest wild idea for fluffing up Starfleet's image. He could at least delete that one unread.
Interesting choice of the word fluffing here. It's January, Spock said, resting a hand on Jim's back, running it down his spine to brush his ass. Someone was feeling frisky, it seemed. Maybe those marathons with Bones had more merit than Jim gave them credit for.
So it is. Starfleet could wait. He shut down the computer and turned back to Spock to rest his hands on his shoulders. And I can always rely on you to keep track of things, oh captain of my schedule. He kissed Spock lightly on the lips.
Vulcans have an innate sense of time which aids in the coordination of shared activities. As if to emphasize this point in the best way possible, Spock began drawing Jim towards their bedroom, and once inside, herded him towards the bed.
Whoa! Chief, are you sure you picked one that stays on the...
Teen it up. It's like,
teen
we'll
it
see.
up.
Yeah. I suspect there's going to be a fade to black shortly.
Oh, let's find out. Shared activities, huh? Jim said, as Spock pushed him onto the bed and climbed on top of him, hands braced on either side of his head. You plan on taking command of our shared intimacy, Captain?
Itinerary, I believe. It's
Itinerary. Thank you. At least one of us is reading. Whew. He ran his fingers through Spock's hair and was rewarded with a scorching kiss.
Yes, Spock murmured against his lips. Once I've completed my research here.
Jim couldn't really argue with that. Yes, there's an interlude symbol here, so we know that we're fading to black.
We're making the Scooby-Doo sound here, by the way, for those of you who don't really have no idea what we're doing.
I was doing a Wayne's World one.
Oh, you're right. It's Wayne's World. Yes. Oh, you are correct. Why did I think Scooby-Doo? Oh, because they have the they talk about doing the Scooby-Doo ending in Wayne's World.
Yes.
That's why I was like, okay. Captain, I wish to make further inquiries regarding romantic events.
Jim looked up from his book, pulling his glasses off to set them on the end table. Spock's face was in shadow, backlit by the lamp with the early dark of the winter sky through the window behind him.
Why are you in uniform? And why are you looming over me? He patted the cushion next to him hopefully. There was something off with their heat, and he wouldn't mind snuggling up to his own personal space heater right now. Space heater.
Oh, my God. Unfortunately, Spock ignored the gesture, folding his hands behind his back.
I was in a meeting with Admiral Peer, Jim sighed. Sorry, I thought it was going to be a Spock. After he ignored her, she must have gotten to Spock. And while I would be happy to join you, I must depart again once I have your answer.
Oh, no, it is Spock.
Oh, right, yes.
Spock said he was in a meeting with Peer,
yes.
And Jim sighed. Yeah, okay. Must you? Jim attempted to raise an eyebrow at Spock and was met with a far more elegantly raised eyebrow in response. Fine, ask your questions, Captain. He settled back on the couch.
What would you consider acceptable activities for a romantic celebration?
This is what you were meeting with Admiral Peer about. He was struck with a sudden horrible thought. Please tell me she's not starting a recruitment campaign about finding love in Starfleet. It would make a horrible sort of sense. Even with a lot of it classified, people had spun his relationship with Spock into quite the melodrama before. There'd even been one poorly disguised vid series about them which Bones had found hilarious. Peer had just the devious mind to use that sort of thing for the good of Starfleet.
She did suggest that, but was quite understanding when I indicated it's not the Vulcan way to expose a personal relationship to such scrutiny.
Jim could just imagine it. Even the ever bull-headed Peer would back down from the face of Spock's stony disapproval.
Then it's your personal research? When Spock inclined his head, Jim continued, Well, we've gone on dates before. It should be something we both enjoy. Maybe a little out of the ordinary in a special occasion.
Aww.
So, dinner at a nice restaurant or a concert or performance. His eyes fell on the old-fashioned paper calendar he'd pinned to the wall. February 1st.
Is this about Valentine's Day, Spock? We really don't need to do anything, or we can just have dinner. There's a nice Italian place that just opened nearby. He couldn't quite keep a smile off his face at Spock's look, a smile that only grew as Spock responded.
I believe you said it should be enjoyable for both parties, yet your statement about Italian seems to contradict that sentiment. Human courtship is truly fascinating.
Well, apparently he doesn't like Italian.
American Italian is not known for being particularly vegetarian, unlike the original Italian that it's based off.
Right, okay. Yeah, but there's probably options. He's a corn-fed Iowa boy.
Vegetarians have it hard in Italy. They go like, I don't eat meat. Oh, no, this is fine. This is chicken. Or,
yeah.
Oh, no, this is sausage. This is not...
Yeah. Oh, you don't need meat? Fine, I'll make lamb.
Yes.
Yeah, no, tricky. And that truly deserved a laugh. Humor mixing with the heavy weight of relief at yet another sign Spock was getting back some of his old humor. He got to his feet and rested a hand on Spock's cheek, feeling the scratch of stubble under his palm.
You can be kind of a bastard, you know.
You sound rather like Dr. McCoy.
You're the one who's been hanging out with him more lately.
True. Perhaps that's where I picked up this quality.
Jim laughed and gave him a peck on the lips before settling back on the couch, taking a moment to take in Spock in his uniform. He really cut a dashing figure, and the captain's insignia looked right on his shoulder.
Tell him that when you see him next, Jim called as Spock walked back towards the door.
Is that an order, Captain? Spock turned back, and even at this distance, Jim could see the traces of humor in his face.
I leave that to your discretion, Captain Spock.
Captain, Spock said, fastening Jim's rank insignia onto his shoulder as Jim blinked blearily into the morning light. Do you know of anywhere to acquire 19th century United States historic memorabilia?
What? Jim rubbed his face warily. Whatever Spock was up to now, it was far too early for it. Why do you need that?
A small instructional project I am pursuing in my conjunction with Admiral Peer.
Jim sighed, walking into the kitchen to run a comb through his hair with Spock trailing behind him. Well, if Spock was taking the brunt off Jim, he supposed it was his duty as husband and captain to help.
Right. About the 19th century? While his own mind went immediately to Lincoln, there were plenty of events to focus on. Though why she'd need memorabilia and why Spock would be tasked with getting it? What exactly is this for?
It is an exhibit of sorts, Spock said, as he followed Jim back into their bedroom and then out to the kitchen, where Jim punched his breakfast into the replicator. And it is not solely about that, but I already know where to acquire replicas of the Vulcan items she required.
Vulcan items?
Ugh.
Jim mouthed the words, turning a disbelieving look on Spock. This doesn't have anything to do with Valentine's Day, does it?
Spock hesitated, staring past Jim as he balanced one hip against the counter.
Dr. McCoy indicated it was customary to surprise a romantic partner. While I have memories of doing so in the past on various occasions, I would appreciate the chance to do so again.
The replicator dinged, and Jim pulled out the oatmeal topped high with brown sugar and fruit, dinging in a spoon and talking around a mouthful.
A need-to-know basis, then. Well, it was a reminder he needed to do something for Spock in turn. Maybe arrange that trip they'd been talking about to the lunar colonies in March. He knew there was some sort of touring exhibit Spock had been enthusing about. I always knew you'd be a tyrant to serve under. He pointed a spoon at Spock.
Spock raised an eyebrow and delicately pushed the spoon back towards Jim. I was unaware our relationship included a command structure. He tilted his head, considering. If that is the case, I believe I may have to write you up for insubordination on numerous occasions. Is that what the kids are calling it these days?
Will you, Captain? Jim said with a grin. I look forward to serving under you then.
Ooh, this is a good story, by the way. Hey, Bones! Jim plopped down across from McCoy at the small cafe they'd agreed to meet for lunch. Absent Spock, who was still busy with his side project with Admiral Peer.
What are you up to? Bones said, clearly pegging the look Jim was giving him. Always the problem with old friends. They knew you too well.
I should be asking you that, Jim said, studying the menu nonchalantly. What have you and Spock been up to?
He flicked his eyes up and watched McCoy's brow fluctuate wildly across his forehead.
Wow! That's an image. Or maybe it's sort of like the pulsating lights in the sick bay. Boom, 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 boom. Me and Spock? He snorted. Oh, that's all Spock. Don't loop me into his crazy plans.
Crazy plans? Huh?
So you know what he's up to.
I know. It involves Shapier. And if that's all I'm saying. He is. Oh, wait.
Oh, whoa, we got him wrong.
We got swept around again, yeah.
Yeah.
I know it involves Shapier, and that's all I'm saying. He's your husband. You ask him.
I did. He wouldn't tell me. He sat back in his chair with a sigh, staring listlessly at the menu. Who's the captain here, anyway?
Last I checked, you're both captains now.
Yep.
When Kirk looked up with narrowed eyes, McCoy just gave him a rather evil grin. And anyway, we both know you've always been the captain in your personal relationship.
What's that supposed to mean?
Yeah. McCoy rolled his eyes and waited for the waiter.
It means that whatever crazy thing Spock has planned, you're going to love it because you're the biggest pair of romantic fools I've ever seen.
Before Jim could respond over the sudden tenderness in his chest,
Aww.
The waiter appeared as summoned, and the topic for now was forgotten.
Okay, quick pause. What do you think it is? You got to guess.
I mean...
What's Spock's surprise? It involves Vulcan items and human 19th century historical items.
Oh, geez.
It's not going to be like a reenactment of something, is it?
It's going to be, Vulcan mind. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what we've seen Spock and T'Pring get up to in their various romantic exchanges.
Yeah.
That's where my mind is going.
Vulcan sex seems to require various sized gongs, mostly.
Well, I mean, but I guess they might be related to betazoids, because they kind of like require Mr. Holmes standing in the background, sipping sherry and...
Nice work if you can get it. Okay. February 13th came and found Jim crossing their quiet living room to retrieve a book, only to decide 10 minutes later he wanted another. The cycle repeated 4 times before he gave up, flopping down next to Spock on the couch and closing his eyes, letting the quiet drift over him.
My use of the title Captain bothers you.
Jim opened his eyes, tilting his head without lifting it to look at Spock. The teasing from the past few weeks that had grown between them seemed to have morphed into solemn curiosity, mixed with gentle apology.
Only in private, when we're off duty, Jim sighed, stretching his arms over his head and shifting closer to Spock.
I see. Would you prefer something another appellation? Dr. McCoy suggested schnookums, though from the tone I believe this was not meant seriously. Spock's own tone made it more than clear what he thought of Bones's attempt at humor, and that he was also using humor to diffuse the situation. Interesting tactic for a Vulcan, but he'd learned from the best.
If those are my choices, I'll take Captain. Jim rested his head on Spock's shoulder, letting his eyes fall shut. No books, no Pearlands, nothing but them. It suited his mood tonight. But you could also call me Jim,
I do know. Fingers traced lightly along his cheek, outlining the angle of his jaw, moving to caress the curve of his ear before coming to rest lightly on his hair. You must understand I don't call you Captain out of any lack of affection. Spock shifted next to him, and Jim kept his eyes determinedly shut, letting Spock continue. It is simply that as my memories have returned, I find that the emotion tied to the word is... Silence fell again, broken only by gentle fingers running through Jim's hair, and the soft swell and fall of breathing.
Is what? Spock, Jim said, finally opening his eyes to find Spock looking back at him with a devotion that took his breath away.
Love, and a certainty that I belong at your side.
The words stirred something in him, buried but never forgotten. He lacked Spock's perfect memory, but this he retained, even after all these years.
As if you've always been there, and always will.
Affirmative.
No Captain followed it, and yet memory continued, words impossibly sharp despite the years of distance. Captain. Even when he doesn't say it, he does.
They were quiet again, and it settled comfortably between them. Jim found himself thinking back to what McCoy had said. Teasing, of course, he was, but the good doctor had a keen insight Jim knew was dismissed to his own detriment.
So he licked his lips and sat up to take Spock's hands in his.
If I'm your captain after all this time, then I want you to know there is no one I'd rather have as my captain than you. Awkward words, maybe, but Spock didn't marry him for poetry, did he?
No.
And in those warm eyes he found a love that matched his own, and a trace of humor, as Spock leaned in to kiss him gently.
I hope you will still think that tomorrow. Events have not proceeded quite as I expected.
Do they ever, Mr. Spock?
Good one. No, Captain, I suppose not.
Hey. When you said events hadn't progressed like you expected, I'll admit I wasn't expecting this.
A bugle trumpeted over the delicate cascade of the Vulcan lyre as a shirtless, oiled Lincoln collapsed into the warm and equally shirtless embrace of Surak. What the This story is amazing.
Oh, Captain, my Captain, said Surak, voice flat as was appropriate for a Vulcan, but conveying a surprising amount of passion in his gaze.
And it was a good thing Admiral Peer was so focused on her play, mouthing along with the words from 3 seats away, or Jim might have gotten an official reprimand for his wince.
A hand rested on top of his, and he felt amusement pass between them as he shared a look with Spock.
I was almost perished in war, have found peace in your arms, Lincoln said, tenderly stroking 2 overly slick fingers across Surak's brow.
The hand tightened over his, and Jim felt something warm uncurl in his chest.
The line was slightly more subdued in the first draft. Spock's eyes widened slightly as the actors began to enthusiastically lock lips, as was the direction.
The oil-slickened actors sank to the stage floor, forms now in silhouette as a billowing cloth rose, only to suggest exactly what they were getting up to.
Wow.
While the bugle and no bulge, sorry.
Battle of the Bulge is something else.
While the bugle and lyre continued together to score their passion with the same discordant enthusiasm that had marked the play as a whole. Still, even the performance had more enthusiasm than skill. Jim found himself on feet, clapping with the rest of the small audience as the leads, the Vulcan chief engineer of the Resolute, and the senior aide of Admiral Naguras, took their bows with all the dignity the play lacked.
Lieutenant Commander Sandak is quite passionate about Talan and Tassel, Spock said, seemingly out of nowhere as he milled around the reception after. It is part of why I recommended Admiral Peer give the role to him.
Not that Jim imagined she needed much encouragement. If he gave an audition anywhere close to this performance.
Passionate, is he? That's not very Vulcan.
Perhaps I used the wrong word. It's a fascination of his, a cultural interest. Much like how acting out the expression of strong emotion is not experiencing that emotion.
Oh, I think he was experiencing it.
Not a method actor, then.
Yeah, there you go. Jim said, nodding at Sandak, standing rather closer than necessary to Nagura's aide. And anyway, I think you used the right words. It's just a Vulcan sort of passion. One I've grown to appreciate.
They managed to dodge Admiral Peer, Matilda Vivian Peer, as she introduced herself to a group of wide-eyed cadets, but please call her Shay, and fled out into the chill February night. Not that Jim minded, not when it was an excuse to hold hands with Spock and pass it off as keeping him warm.
That holiday in the play, Roomery, Jim said after they walked along the path home for a few minutes. Is that real, or did Admiral Peer make that up?
As you've likely come to realize, I served as a consultant for this project. It was I who made Admiral Peer aware of Roomery, though it was no longer celebrated by Earth's 19th century.
Jim snorted and pressed closer to Spock as the wind picked up.
Yeah, Surak also wasn't alive then, so I think we've accepted the hysteria here might be a bit shaky.
I am told it is art, Captain, and that we should appreciate it for how it speaks to our souls.
The Admiral told you that, Captain? With how weary Spock had sounded as he had said it, Jim suspected accuracy versus art was an argument Spock had many times over the past few weeks, and one he'd lost resoundingly.
I always heed the words of a superior officer, Captain, Spock said, coming to a stop at a small park they often cut through, and turning to Jim with a raised eyebrow.
I'm still your superior, on the bridge. Jim reached up, tangling his fingers into Spock's hair as he pulled him into a kiss.
I would have it no other way, Spock murmured against his lips.
They continued on through the park at peace, but for one thing. At the start of his all, Spock had talked about courtship rituals, and why should the sharing only go one way?
Ah, good one, Jim. You know, maybe we could celebrate your romantic holiday next. He nudged Spock and grinned at him when he turned to look at Jim. Roomery. I can think of a few things we can do with the traditional oil.
Spock tilted his head in consideration for a moment, then nodded, doing nothing to hide the twinkle in his eyes or the heat behind them.
I believe I could locate the relevant supplies.
Truly, they were the best team in the Starfleet.
Then lead on, my dear Captain. Oh, this is awesome! Oh, the notes from the author are, the title is from a poem with the same name, Oh Captain, My Captain, by Walt Whitman, because it just fit. And the Vulcan holiday, Roomery, got from the Memory Alpha Wiki, so that's something to look up.
Interesting, yes.
Thank you to VallesMarineris for writing this fantastic story. Thank you to the Chief for selecting it for us. And Chief, what are we going to be recapping next week?
So next week we'll be recapping TOS 319 The Cloudminders, but our next fanfiction episode will be I Just Might Say It Tonight by Orca Mermaid, in which 5 times Garrick and Julian didn't voice their feelings, and 1 time they finally did.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We shall be looking forward to doing that for you.
But we have one more thing to do here, and that is...
The hell is this?
I'm leaving Starfleet.
Energize!
We hope you've enjoyed this week's episode with your friends Kay and Kaki, production and editing by your chief engineer Greg, and music by Fox Amor. Join us next week for the Cloudminders, TOS 319. Visit joyoftrek.com/links to send us your recommendations, support us on Patreon, or to find us on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to Joy of Trek, and we'll see you out there.